Today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sajid Alavi. He was a recipient of the 2021 Global Food Systems Seed Grant Program. He and his colleagues worked on a project titled Plant-Based Meat for Sustainable Food Systems. Dr. Alavi?
Thank you. So this is the Global Food Systems Seed Grant Project, and from the very beginning, we envisioned it as a multidisciplinary project, and with the idea that it will lead to more multidisciplinary collaborations beyond just the PIs, and also roping in industry and addressing economic development in the state of Kansas and beyond. So this is really what I'm going to talk about. So me being the main PI and bringing in the background of processing and extrusion, and as applied to, in this case, food products, but also it can be applied to a lot of other applications as well. Also co-PIs, Dr. Yanghui Lee, who is a protein chemist. He brings in the chemistry side of the expertise, and Dr. Martin Talavera, who is part of the Food, Nutrition, Dietetics, and Health Department in the College of Human Ecology. And he brings in the sensory and consumer perception aspect. So really envision as a multidisciplinary project addressing sustainable food systems through plant-based meat applications. So the overall goal was, of course, to foster value addition of Kansas agricultural commodities using really extrusion as a way, processing as a way to enhance value, and with the application focused on plant-based meat products, which are relatively novel, but growing very fast, also very nutritious as well, because they're high in protein, and they have other advantages potentially for health. And also addressing a sustainable food system, because these products and this application in particular might be considered, and there's still a lot of work going in the area to establish this objectively, but might contribute to a more sustainable food system from a point of view of energy and water usage for making high protein products, which are, in this case, potentially substitutes to meat or supplements to meat. So the objectives are listed over here. In specific, extrusion was front and center for developing these plant-based meat products, but we were also focused on comparing traditional ingredients such as wheat gluten and soy proteins, which have been used for these products, with novel ingredients like pea protein. And also compare these plant-based meat products with animal meats, which is, of course, the final goal of these products, is to kind of supplement animal meat or be an alternative to animal meat. And also from a science perspective, which allows us to really address bigger opportunities where fundamental science is involved, like USDA grants. We wanted to take a shot at understanding the underlying mechanisms for making these products, or which contribute to the quality of these products, be it the chemistry or the physics behind the process, or chemistry behind the ingredients. So that being said, for the objectives, let's get into some very quick introduction of the topic of plant-based meats, and from there I'll go into the actual results. So plant-based meats really cater to a very fast-growing segment in North America and also other developed economies, and which is minimally processed, clean label, nutritious and healthy products. So now there are various kinds of nutritious and healthy products, and clean labeling and minimal processing can be tailored towards those products. But plant-based meat products typically do not fall in the, typically speaking, I should say, but our goal was to actually be able to use minimal processing and also clean labeling aspects as well in this project. But typically they're highly processed, and they usually have a lot of additives in there, which help in the texturization process to make them more suitable alternatives to animal meat. So that's where the challenge is, to bring in processing expertise, the chemistry expertise, and also the sensory and consumer expertise to be able to make these products even address that consumer segment of minimal processing and clean label. Besides the fact, of course, they are nutritious, they are healthy, and that's actually some of the driving factors for plant-based meat. For example, these products address certain lifestyles which may be considered by people to be healthy, although there is debate out there on that, but vegetarian, vegan, flexitarian, where you don't rely completely on meat for your protein. You actually are flexible between plant proteins and meat. So this provides a good alternative. Also, nutritionally, they're supposed to be fairly good and competitive with some of the other healthier products. They're high in protein, of course, and unlike meat products or many meat products, they don't bring any cholesterol. Also, as people are, around the world are getting more and more prosperous, more disposable income, they can actually afford some of these products, which are more expensive than traditional meat. So economic prosperity is driving these products too. Health complications, religious restrictions about not eating meat, for example, in certain parts of the world. Health complications meaning some folks, from a point of view of, say, cholesterol or other digestive problems, might not be able to consume regular meat. So for them, it might be an appealing category of products. And also environmental sustainability is an important aspect, because a lot of studies have pointed out that animal meat can be very, comparatively speaking, resource intensive as opposed to plant-based meat. One other factor which is not listed over here is concerns for animal welfare, which plant-based meat can address, because there are no animals involved in making these products. So a lot of research in this area, a lot of different experts who weigh in on the current population growth and the meat consumption and how it's not sustainable. This is one study which was published in National Geographic, which concluded that at the current rate of growth for meat consumption by 2050, in another, say, 30 years or so, we'll need almost every acre of the crop land on the planet for livestock production to be able to meet the increase in consumption of meat. So that's really summarizes the driving factors for plant-based meat. It has evolved a lot over the years, and it used to be still in vogue, say 20, 30 years back, but more recently, around 2015 and 2016, as you'll notice in this picture, Beyond Meat and Impossible, those were a couple of companies which started a spurt in this sector. So from then onwards, from 2015, 2016 onwards, it has really shown a very fast growth driven by a lot of those factors I mentioned before. So there are two different products that this particular project focused on, which are both plant-based meat applications. One of them is a high moisture meat analog product, where products come out of the extruder really already meat-like, and they could be used as whole or pulled or cubed animal muscle meat, again, coming from plant proteins. The second kind is a lower moisture textured vegetable protein or TVP product, which can be ground and then be used in patties or hamburgers and such, in those kind of applications. So two different applications that we focused on. The basic process is plant protein is processed with heat, and also the mechanical in the extruder. The plant proteins are unraveled or denatured and then lined up almost parallel or lined parallel to each other, and then cross-linking between those proteins are initiated, and that those cross-linking networks are what make the product fibrous and meat-like in texture. So you start off with a more globular, very non-fibrous texture to a fibrous and meat-like texture. So here's where, let me show a quick video of the process, which might allow us to understand how these products are processed using extrusion, and then move on to some specific results. So here's the extruder, and you can see this long die from which this plant-based meat product is coming out. And it comes out really at a high moisture, almost meat-like moisture. This is the high moisture application. And this die, long die, serves to cool down the product and densify it to give it the right texture. Upstream of it is the extruder, where the cooking takes place, where the denaturation of protein and the cross-linking and alignment that I talked about, that happens. So the extruder and the die together combine from a point of view of the process, and that's the extruder control panel, where we control the temperatures and moistures and the screw speed or energy intensity. So this is really the process for making the high moisture meat analog plant-based meat product. So let me move on back to the presentation. I wanted to just give you a visual of how you take plant proteins, be it wheat or pulses, and convert them into meat. So hopefully that gives a good idea. So we'll skip that, another video. But we are focusing on the traditional ingredients in this study, like soybeans or wheat, which are good sources of protein, but they have the limitations like soybean considered to be, well, it is indeed mostly in the US GMO, which can be a challenge when you want to market it overseas, like in, say, Europe. Also, soy is associated with allergies, although really a very functional ingredient. Wheat also has its own challenges. Again, very good ingredient for plant-based meat and has been used traditionally, but it has allergies, also gluten intolerance, and celiac disease has been linked to wheat protein, so gluten. And peas being the new kid on the block, so to say, they're more clean label oriented ingredients, which are pea-based, although they have lower functionality. So first part of the study focused on comparing these different ingredients, soy, wheat, and pea protein, and impact on texture of high moisture meat analogs. So raw material, product texture, and extrusion really go very close to each other, interlinked to each other, and the process has a big impact on the final product, no doubt, but raw materials also have a big impact on the quality. So we work with individual soy, wheat, and pea protein-based formulations, which we call single protein, high moisture meat analog products. And then we also use combinations of pea and wheat with soy. So we call them multi-protein HMMAs, or high moisture meat analogs. So this is what was studied. So there were 5 recipes, 3 of them single protein, soy, wheat, and pea, and 2 of them complementary multi-protein, soy plus pea and soy plus wheat. We use a twin screw extruder that you saw in the video for making these products attached with a cooling die, for densifying the product and making them more layered. And we did work on texture and sensory analysis. So formulations are given over here. The soy-based is based on pea protein isolate and soy concentrate. The wheat-based is primarily wheat gluten and also wheat flour. The pea-based is pea protein isolate mostly. And then we have the combination of wheat and soy and pea and soy. And some further information on materials and methods. That's extruder screw profile that we used. I'm sorry. And this is again the same process pictured over here, the product coming out of the extruder, the high moisture meat analog. Now that can also be shredded in the shredding system, and you get this shredded product, which can be also used as pulled meat, or it can be put into hamburgers in that kind of a style of a product too. The texture analysis was done, the hardness and the softness of the product, and the cutting strength of the product using a texture analyzer. And this was done in different directions. So to understand layering, longitudinal or transverse to the direction of extrusion. And the protein content of these products range from anywhere from 50 to 70%. And a lot of the other part of it was moisture. And the process energy and process moisture was documented. So here are the products in terms of pictures or visuals and different cross sections, the transverse and longitudinal. So the S is mostly soy based, single protein, W is wheat based, single protein, and P is pea based. And the PS is combination of pea and soy, and WS is combination of wheat and soy. So you can clearly see that the P based has some challenges in terms of forming the right texture. It's more porous. It's also not forming the right layers. It's peeling off, as you can see in the bottom picture, versus wheat is very dense, very chewy, and probably maybe too chewy than what you want. But anything with soy in there, soy by itself, highly layered, very much meat-like, but also when you add soy to the pea-based formulation, leads to much better layering, and also with the wheat. So soy helped to modulate the texture and the structure of these products, as was documented by these tests on firmness of the product and toughness of the product. So soy actually helped in making a better product as opposed to wheat alone, wheat gluten alone, or pea protein alone. So those textural attributes were documented to understand how the cross-linking takes place between the protein chains. These are disulfide bonds primarily, which are leading to cross-linking, and to understand that the texture analysis really helped. And we went into further analysis, comparing them with meat products. So the PC on the right-hand side is the pulled chicken, and the PP is the pulled pork. And we could compare the hardness, the springiness, and chewiness of the plant-based meat products, which turned out to be very favorable, especially when we had soy in the mix. So that helped us to really lead to a better product. Second part of the study was on a drier kind of plant-based meat, textured vegetable protein. Here we are going more into chemistry of it and understanding the raw material properties, and using that to design products tailored to certain meat textures, like chicken versus, say, fish. So to understand the functionality of these ingredients is very important from a chemistry point of view. So soy and wheat, typically high functionality. Pea-based ingredients, although they're non-allergenic, non-GMO, but they have relatively either unknown functionality or poor functionality. So part of the project was to understand functionality from a physical perspective, water absorption, also from a chemistry perspective. So several tests were done on the raw material, including water absorption, least gelation concentration to see how protein gels, and rapid viscoanalysis to understand how protein develops viscosity on heating and cooling. From there, we could document, or we could categorize some proteins as cold water swelling and some others as requiring heat to swell and gel. And the basic premise was that the cold water swelling will lead to a softer texture, more say, let's say chicken-like or fish-like, and heat swelling will lead to a firmer texture, say beef-like. So to be able to test that hypothesis was the part of what we did with this study. So we documented or measured the water absorption index of these raw ingredients. Obviously, some ingredients are very highly water, they have high water affinity, like the soy protein isolate over here, as opposed to that wheat gluten. The yellow bar has very low water affinity, so you can characterize them as heat swelling or cold water swelling or non-cold water swelling. The least gelation concentration test also is another nice test where you apply heat to understand how protein gels. The lower the concentration, as listed in this LGC column, the more likelihood that the protein is very good at gelling when you apply heat. So, for example, soy concentrate and soy isolate at the lowest least gelation concentration, so they're indicated to be heat gelling with the positive plus mark, versus some others are not as much heat gelling. Then we use the rapid viscoanalysis also to understand how protein develops viscosity. So wheat gluten requires heat. As you can see, the peak develops when the material is heated up, peak viscosity, versus soy isolate can develop a peak viscosity without any heating at the far left side of this testing profile. So soy being cold water swelling and wheat being heat swelling. So based on that, either cold water or heat swelling, we could actually develop certain recipes which could lead to a softer or firmer texture. So going further, so that's really circling the cold water swelling proteins, and these are the heat swelling proteins. We develop recipes, a mixture of various ingredients, protein ingredients. We're mixing and matching to get to the same protein content between 70 to 80% protein. Some of the recipes are formulated to be cold swelling, some of them to be heat swelling, some of them to be intermediate. And then we analyze these recipes just like we analyze individual raw materials for water absorption. So again, cold water swelling recipes absorb more water, heat swelling recipes absorb less water. For heat gelation also, cold water swelling were less heat gelling versus heat swelling proteins at the bottom of this list are more heat gelling. So clearly the recipes could be categorized into different cold or heat gelling properties. The RVA testing allowed us to understand again similarly that the cold water swelling recipes indeed required not much heat. They were swelling and developing viscosity at a very low temperature, the very beginning of the test before we even ramp up the heat, versus the heat water swelling recipes required much higher time and temperature to swell, so 7 minutes or so as opposed to only 1 minute for cold water swelling. So we extruded these products to texturize them, and what we get was various products that are shown over here. And these products can be either used as such in chunks or can be shredded using a special mill, the Urshel mill, but we also use a hammer mill to shred them to be used in hamburger patties. And then we studied various properties of the plant-based meat products. Things like how much water they can hold or absorb, and how much energy was required to process them. And clearly, the cold water swelling could absorb a lot more water, as the bars represent, than the heat swelling proteins. So they were more porous and they lead to a softer texture than the less water absorbing heat swelling proteins. So clearly, based on what we had or initially hypothesized, the cold water swelling actually have a higher water absorption or holding capacity, more softer texture than the heat swelling, which have a less water absorption and harder texture. So which kind of was also confirmed from the product, texture analysis. You can see the clearly over here that there's a gradation in the hardness of these products when tested in a texture analyzer. So you'll see that the heat swelling proteins are a little harder in texture. Those are dark colored bands versus the cold water light colored bands or bars are softer in texture. So again, we were able to be able to make products with different textures. And this kind of boils down to the structure of the products. The heat swelling proteins form a very nicely layered structure, as you can see. The H is representing H and S initials representing heat swelling. The cold swelling are more porous. That leads to a more spongy or softer texture. The intermediate is somewhere in the middle, not completely porous, not completely layered. So based on that, we could really summarize from this project that various protein sources can be used, but some proteins are better than the others. It's always desirable to mix and match some of the proteins to develop the right texture. For example, pea protein might require mixing with soy to get the right texture. Soy by itself is a great ingredient, though, although it has its drawbacks, including the GMO and allergenicity. Also, we could determine that cold swelling and heat swelling proteins lead to different textures, and we can predict textures a priori, which is very useful. And these products are now going on to be tested for consumer, preference and shaped into patties and to be able to really go head to head against meat-based products. So there are, of course, future steps to any of this, and we worked on several grants based on the seed funding. We also developed industry partnerships beyond just the multidisciplinary partnership within K-State. Several industry folks have been involved in the last year in this project, and that has gone on to develop very good relationships with Wenger Manufacturing, the equipment manufacturer of Sabetha, Kansas, MGP Ingredients out of Atchison, Kansas, another great collaborator. And we've strengthened that collaboration. They're suppliers of wheat protein. Purist Foods out of Minneapolis, suppliers of pea protein. PepsiCo also funded us for a project based on what came out of this grant, the different techniques for characterizing proteins. So we got this funding from PepsiCo. Cargill and ADM, again, are good collaborators, and this project helped us enlarge that collaboration. Even some smaller companies have worked with us in the last year or so based on the knowledge we have gained from this project, including Nature's Fine, which is a startup company which is utilizing mushroom proteins or fungal proteins, and Ortera is a group which really develops colors for plant-based meat to be able to make them more similar in appearance to meat. Some grants that we have targeted based on the seed funding from the Global Food Systems are listed over here, including a funded grant from Kansas Soybean Commission, $78,790, which is ongoing, and a big grant that we put in for USDA very recently, earlier in the year, for $650,000. And these grants are multidisciplinary. They bring in a lot of different collaborations and allow us to really enlarge the multidisciplinary aspect of this initiative. Several graduate students have worked on this project and got trained, including Delaney Webb, who got a master's thesis. I should correct the date, it's 2020. I'm sorry, 2021. Yes, that's the correct date. Blake Plattner, who graduated this year. Jenna Flory, who's still working on plant-based meat as a thesis, will graduate in the spring. This different multidisciplinary collaboration it fostered was really one big benefit from which we can really go on to larger grants, multidisciplinary collaborations with ag econ, for example, with chemical engineering, where also we have a professor who's now working with us to employ machine learning in plant-based meat applications, and food nutrition, dietetics and health, Dr. Talavera, and grain science, Dr. Lee and Dr. Kali Ramesh Siliveru. Dr. Siliveru is a milling expert, and he has now been involved in working with us and including the grants we've developed. Publications, we got 2 very good publications already, accepted recently. Several other publications are under preparation. Again, thanks to the Global Food Systems grant. Several presentations, I've highlighted a couple though, which are prestigious presentations. One of them at the Institute of Food Technologists, IFT annual meeting in Chicago. And we had 2 students present, Blake Plattner and Jenna Flory. They work on this project. And also this very prestigious Industry University Consortium, which is a consortium of various universities and industry partners and sponsors, which meets at various places. I've been to meetings in, for example, in St. Louis and now in Manhattan as well, where we presented this work to a bunch of industry partners and who really appreciated our work on plant-based meat and proteins. And also several other presentations in various forums, which I've not listed over here. And these are references, and really, in the end, I'd like to acknowledge the K-State Global Food Systems Seed Grant Program which allowed us to do this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alavi. And I would like to encourage any of the listeners to reach out to Dr. Alavi if you've got questions or would like to discuss the program in more detail.
Thank you, Dr. Alavi.